The scream ripped through the cabin at 11,000 feet, and in that instant, 32 lives hung by a single thread stretched across the clear blue afternoon sky. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that gives no warning of the horror it is about to deliver. The private jet, sleek and gleaming, cut smoothly through the clouds on a routine flight from Denver to Seattle. On board sat Richard Callaway, the billionaire founder of Callaway Dynamics, a man used to controlling every variable in his life, surrounded by his usual entourage of assistants and board members. And near the back, in the modest seats reserved for support staff, sat Martin Hale, a quiet mechanic who had been hired just that morning as an emergency technical consultant after a last-minute equipment issue grounded the original specialist. Martin was not the kind of man anyone noticed. He wore a faded jacket, kept his eyes down, and spoke only when spoken to. Nobody on that plane knew that 6 years earlier, he had been an Air Force flight engineer, a man who had once kept broken aircraft in the sky through pure will and steady hands. Nobody knew that he had walked away from that life after losing his wife to illness, choosing instead to raise his 9-year-old daughter Nora alone, working quiet jobs that let him be home for dinner every night. Nobody knew, because Martin never told anyone. He simply showed up, did the work, and disappeared back into his small apartment where a little girl waited for him with crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. The first sign of trouble was a man near the cockpit door standing up too fast, his hand trembling as he pulled a weapon from beneath his coat. His name, they would later learn, was Victor Reyes, a disgraced former Callaway Dynamics engineer who had lost everything when Richard Callaway shut down the division Victor had built his career around. Victor had boarded posing as a technical liaison, his identity slipping past security in the chaos of the last-minute crew change. He was not a hardened criminal. He was a broken man clutching the wreckage of his own life, desperate and unpredictable, which made him more dangerous than any professional could ever be. "Nobody move," Victor shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. "This plane does not land until Richard Callaway signs over what he stole from me." Screams erupted. A young flight attendant named Priya Deshmukh froze near the galley, her serving tray clattering to the floor. Richard Callaway, for all his boardroom bravado, went pale and silent, his hands raised instinctively. The cabin, once filled with quiet business chatter, became a chamber of held breath and pounding hearts. If you believe in quiet heroes and second chances, take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Real Dad's Story so you never miss a story like this one. Martin Hale did not move at first. He sat perfectly still, his mind racing back to a version of himself he had buried years ago. He thought of Nora, of her gap-toothed smile, of the promise he had made at her mother's funeral that he would always come home to her. For a moment, staying invisible felt like the safest choice, the choice that would guarantee he saw his daughter again. But then he watched Victor's gun hand shake, watched the barrel drift toward Priya, who was quietly sobbing near the emergency exit, and something inside Martin refused to stay silent any longer. He rose slowly, hands open, his voice calm in a way that startled everyone in the cabin. "My name is Martin," he said. "I used to fly planes like this one. Let me help you land safely so nobody has to get hurt." Victor spun toward him, eyes wild, the gun trembling in his grip. "Sit down. I don't need help, I need justice." "You'll get further with justice if everyone on this plane walks away alive," Martin replied, taking one slow step forward. His voice did not shake. It carried the same steadiness he once used to talk terrified young pilots through engine failures thousands of feet above hostile terrain. "I know what it feels like to lose everything, Victor. I lost my wife. I know what it does to a person. But hurting these people will not bring back what Callaway took from you. Let me help you find another way." For a moment, the cabin held its breath along with him. Victor's finger hovered near the trigger, his jaw clenched, tears welling in eyes that had clearly not slept in days. Then, faintly, the plane shuddered, a violent jolt that threw passengers sideways. Victor, in his panic, had struck the cockpit door hard enough to damage the wiring behind the control panel, and the jet's autopilot flickered, warning lights flooding the cabin in a wash of red. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with controlled panic, announcing a critical system failure and the sudden, terrifying loss of altitude control. Screams filled the cabin once more. Overhead bins rattled open. Richard Calloway gripped his armrest, his composed executive mask completely shattered, replaced by the raw fear of a man who suddenly understood that money could not save him now. Martin felt the old instincts flood back through his body, sharp and clear, cutting through years of quiet domestic life like a blade through fog. This was the moment. Not for revenge, not for glory, but for every person trembling in those seats, for the family in Seattle waiting for a father who worked in shipping, for the young attendant clutching the emergency exit handle, for Nora, who was waiting at home for her father to walk through the door that evening as he always did. "Victor, listen to me," Martin said, stepping past him now, ignoring the gun entirely. "That door you hit just damaged the stabilizer control. If I don't get into that cockpit in the next 2 minutes, this plane is going down, and none of us are walking away from this. Not you either." Something in Martin's voice, some quiet, unshakable authority, broke through Victor's desperation. His arm lowered, just slightly, just enough. Martin moved past him and burst into the cockpit, where the co-pilot was fighting frantically with unresponsive controls while the pilot shouted coordinates into the radio. Martin's hands found the exposed wiring beneath the damaged panel instantly, muscle memory guiding fingers that had not touched an aircraft's inner workings in 6 years. He worked with a calm precision that seemed impossible given the shuddering, screaming chaos around him, reconnecting a severed circuit, resetting the stabilizer manually while shouting instructions to the co-pilot about manual trim adjustments. The plane lurched once more, then, gradually, terrifyingly slowly, began to steady. The screaming in the cabin softened into desperate prayers and quiet sobbing relief. Martin remained in the cockpit for the next 20 minutes, guiding the crew through a careful, manual descent toward the nearest airport, his voice never once rising in panic even as sweat soaked through his faded jacket. Behind him, Victor had collapsed into a seat, weeping, the gun taken gently from his hand by Priya, who despite her own terror, had found the courage to approach him once the immediate danger passed. When the wheels finally touched the runway, the entire cabin erupted, not in the celebratory way of movies, but in the raw, trembling relief of people who had truly believed they would die that afternoon. Passengers wept openly. Richard Calloway sat frozen for a long moment before turning to look at the quiet mechanic who had just saved every life on board, including his own. In the weeks that followed, Martin's story spread far beyond the walls of Calloway Dynamics. Reporters wanted interviews. Richard Calloway, humbled in a way his wealth had never allowed him to be, personally visited Martin's small apartment, not with cameras, but with a quiet offer to fund Nora's education and to give Martin a position leading the company's safety division, one that would let him work reasonable hours and be home for dinner every single night. Victor, moved by the mercy Martin had shown him in the cabin that day, agreed to seek help, and Richard, in a gesture nobody expected, quietly funded his treatment rather than pursuing the harshest possible charges. Martin never sought the spotlight. He returned home that evening, just as he always had, and found Nora waiting by the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. She ran to him the moment his key turned in the lock, and he knelt down and held her the way he had held her every night since her mother passed, silently promising, once again, that he would always come home. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below. It means more than you know and helps these stories reach more people. Before we go, if you made it this far, comment the word hero below so we know you believe that quiet, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary courage. Martin Hale never called himself brave. He simply believed that showing up, staying steady, and choosing kindness even in the face of fear was the only way he knew how to live. And on one terrifying Tuesday afternoon, high above the clouds, that quiet belief saved 32 lives, and reminded everyone on board that heroes rarely look the way we expect them to.